The chandelier in the ballroom of the Signal Seoul weighed 1,041 kilograms, and on the night of the 17th of November, at 9:47 p.m., it was still turning slowly on its motorized chain because the wedding planner had not yet found the switch to stop it. It threw shards of light across a floor of Carrara marble that had been laid in 2013 by three brothers from Andong who had since died. One of a heart attack in a bathhouse, one on a fishing trawler off Tongyong, and the third of a cancer no one could name aloud in his family for the 6 months it took him. The marble did not know any of this. It only held the light. And in the center of that light, on a low, round table draped in ivory silk, sat a single object the guests kept photographing without understanding. A lacquered wooden box the size of a hymnal, dark red, its lid inlaid with mother-of-pearl in the shape of a crane in flight. The card beside it, in a hand no one recognized, read only, "For the bride, from one who was here before you." 11 floors below, in the hotel bar called Bar 81, Kang Min-jae was drinking soju with one ice cube in it, a habit his mother had once called an American affectation, and watching the elevator on the far wall of the lobby. He had been watching it for 41 minutes. He was 41 years old. He had signed the papers that made him the sole shareholder of the Kong Group's legitimate holdings company at 41 minutes past 3 that afternoon, in a lawyer's office in Yeoksamdong, whose windows faced the back of a building his father had once owned and lost. He had a scar on the inside of his left wrist that he had received in 2001 in a fish market in Jagalchi, and a habit of turning the glass in his hand a quarter turn every time he thought of his Aomeoni, who had refused to come tonight, claiming a fever she did not have. He thought of her now. He turned the glass. He thought, without knowing why, of a navy blue dress he had not seen in 5 years, and of the way its hem had once brushed the wooden threshold of his mother's kitchen. On a morning, he had told himself he would not remember. He had been wrong to marry the girl upstairs. He did not yet know how wrong. Kang Min-jae, 41, was on paper the third-generation head of what the financial press called, with a diplomat's evasion, the Kang Group, a portfolio of shipping subsidiaries, a private security firm registered in Mapo-gu, a chain of orthopedic clinics in Cheongdam, and 3 restaurants in Hanam that had never once turned a profit but had entertained 4 sitting cabinet ministers in the last 18 months. He owned a duplex penthouse in Pyeongchang-dong, a hanok in Bukchon he had never slept in, a house on the northern shore of Jeju with a persimmon tree older than his father, and a black 2024 Mercedes Maybach that his driver, old Pio, refused to wash on rainy days for reasons of superstition Min-jae had stopped asking about. He had married once, in 2019, in a small civil ceremony in Yangpyeong that no photographer had been invited to. The bride had been a woman named Adaeze Okonkwo Kang, born in Enugu, raised in Lagos and then in London, educated in forensic accounting at the London School of Economics, and then at Seoul National, who had come to Korea in 2017 to consult on an anti-money laundering audit that had, in a way neither of them anticipated, ended in his mother's kitchen with a bowl of doenjang jjigae and a proposal made in a language he had not previously known he possessed. They had been married for 3 years and 4 months. She had left in the spring of 2022 with 1 suitcase and a folded note his mother had put in her hand at the gate. Tonight, at the Signal Seoul, he had married Han Seo-yeon, 29, only daughter of the Assemblyman Han of Seongbuk-dong. In a ceremony attended by 416 guests, 3 sitting members of the National Assembly, a former prime minister, the chairman of a Singaporean sovereign fund, and a Japanese cellist whose name he could not now recall. Bloomberg Korea had called them, that morning, the perfect power couple. Chosun Ilbo had used the word dynasty in a headline above the fold. His new wife had worn a hanbok in the ceremony, and then changed, for the reception, into a Dior gown, the color of bone. On paper. His mother had warned him 3 times in the year before the wedding, and each time he had heard the warning, and each time he had folded it, the way a man folds a receipt he does not intend to keep. The first warning came in April, in her kitchen in the old house in Eunpyeonggu. Over a bowl of samgyetang she had made herself despite the tremor in her left hand that had not fully left her since the stroke. She had watched him eat, and then she had set down her spoon and said in the flat, unemphatic Korean of women born before the war, that a house without its first daughter was a house with a draft, and a draft, over time, could put out even the strongest fire. He had laughed. He had said, "Eo Meoni, this is soup, not a seance." She had not laughed. She had lifted her spoon again and eaten in silence, and the tremor in her left hand had made a small tapping sound against the porcelain that he had heard for 3 weeks afterward in his sleep. The second came in August, in the front courtyard of the Bukchon Hanok, when he had brought Seo Yeon to meet her for the first and, as it turned out, only time. His mother had opened the gate herself in a gray linen joguri, and she had looked at Seo Yeon for the length of 1 full breath before she had turned her eyes to her son and said, very softly, "Aina, you have brought me a guest, not a daughter." Seo Yeon had not understood. He had understood. He had folded it. The third came in October, on a Sunday morning in the kitchen again, when he had stopped by unannounced and found her sitting at the table with a photograph in her hand. She had not shown it to him. She had turned it face down when he came in, and she had poured him a cup of barley tea, and she had said, looking at the wall above his shoulder, that a woman who leaves without asking for anything is a woman who was owed everything. Then she had said his name, not Min-jae, but Min-jae-ya, the diminutive she had not used since he was 14. And she had said, "You will remember I told you this." That was the first quotable line. He had folded it too. He had been wrong. He did not yet know how wrong. The message arrived on his private phone at 8:41 p.m., 7 minutes after the last of the wedding toasts, from a number that resolved, when his security lieutenant checked it later, to a prepaid SIM purchased in cash, 41,000 won in a single 50,000 won note with change refused, at a convenience store in Itaewon at 4:12 that same afternoon. The store's camera had recorded the buyer for a duration of 2 minutes and 41 seconds. She had worn a navy overcoat that had cost more than the night manager downstairs earned in a year. She had kept her face turned toward the cigarette display. She had left without buying cigarettes. The message read, in Korean, "Your mother is at the Pyeongchang Donghouse. She is not alone. Come now. Do not bring the bride yet." He read it twice. He laughed once, a short, dry sound that no one in the bar heard. He finished the soju. He set the glass down and turned it a quarter turn. He made one phone call to old Pyo, who was waiting in the underground garage in the Maybach, and he said only, "Pyeongchang." The house. He did not say which house. Old Pyo had driven for his father before him and knew that there was only ever one house that mattered. He rode the elevator down alone. He passed through the lobby without acknowledging the concierge who bowed. He did not tell his new wife he was leaving. He would tell himself later that he had not wanted to spoil the reception. He would know later that he had already understood in some hollow chamber below the level of language that the reception was already spoiled, and had been spoiled from the moment his mother declined to attend. The Maybach pulled away from the Signal Seoul at 9:53 p.m. into the wet November dark, and Kong Min-jae watched the city slide past his window. The tower lights of Jamsil, the black cut of the Han, the long climb into Pyeongchang-dong. And he thought again of a hem brushing a wooden threshold, and of his mother's voice, saying his name in a diminutive she had not used in almost 30 years. The gate of the family estate in Pyeongchang-dong was already open when he arrived. This was the first wrongness. His father had built that gate in 1998 out of Manchurian oak, imported through a shipping contact in Vladivostok, and in the 26 years since, the gate had never once been left open at night. Old Pio stopped the Maybach in the drive and did not turn off the engine. Min-jae stepped out into a fine, cold rain. The gravel under his shoes was the gravel of his childhood. The persimmon tree in the far corner of the courtyard, older than he was bare. The great wooden front door of the house, carved with a crane on the left panel and a pine on the right in the old Joseon manner, was closed. He climbed the 3 stone steps. He raised his hand to knock. Before his knuckles touched the wood, the door opened from within. The little girl who stood on the other side was perhaps 7 years old. She wore a cream-colored wool dress that came to her knees, and white stockings and small black patent shoes. She held, tucked under one arm, a stuffed rabbit whose left ear had been repaired at some point in its life, with a running stitch in navy thread of a kind he recognized. His Halmione's stitch, the one she had used on his socks in 1989 in the house in Yunpyeong-gu. The child's hair was in 2 braids. Her eyes were the wide, unhurried eyes of a child who had never in her life had reason to be afraid of an adult. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Then she smiled. "Welcome home," she said, in Korean, and then in English, in the softer accent of a child who had learned both languages at the same age from 2 different mouths. "Welcome home." He could not answer. Behind the child, in the warm yellow light of the entrance hall, a woman stepped into the frame of the doorway. She wore a navy blue dress of a plain wool weave he had last seen, 5 years earlier, folded on the end of a bed, in a room he had not entered since. Her hair was shorter now and threaded at the temples, with a gray she had not troubled to dye. She had lost, he saw, perhaps 4 kilograms from her frame since the last time he had stood this close to her. The kind of weight a person loses from grief, or from months of feeding someone else before feeding herself. She held, in her left hand, a small enamel bowl in which floated 3 thin slices of Korean pear. She had been born in Enugu, in the state of Anambra, in the Federal Republic of Nigeria, in the year the war ended for her father's village and began for her mother's. She had been baptized Adaiz, which in Igbo means daughter of the king, and she had been given, at the age of 6, by her paternal grandmother, the second name Chiamaka, which means God is beautiful. She had been educated at Cheltenham Ladies' College on a scholarship and at the London School of Economics on another, and at Seoul National on a fellowship she had won against 311 other applicants, and she was, at the age of 39, one of only 2 forensic accountants in the Republic of Korea, licensed to testify in both English and Korean before the Seoul Central District Court. She looked at her ex-husband. She did not smile. She did not smile. "Dioreo wasioyo," she said, in the polite form of the verb to come in, the form a housekeeper uses to a returning master, the form a mother uses to a returning child. "You have come. Sit down." He sat down. If you are still with me in this room, if the air in your chest has gone a little thinner, if you have set your tea down without meaning to, if you are already leaning toward the screen the way one leans toward a window on a night one cannot quite explain, then take one slow breath now and hit subscribe to Korean Mafia Family. Tap the bell so the next chapter finds you the moment it is set down. What happens in the next 41 minutes will unlock your understanding of what a family actually is in 3 places you did not know were locked, and it will rebuild it with something quieter, harder, and far more human than what you walked in with. Stay. You are going to want to be in the room when the mother speaks, and when the child speaks, and when the woman in the navy dress finally says the sentence she has been carrying for 5 years. And when this is over, tell me one thing in the comments. What would you have done on the top step of that house in Pyeongchang-dong when the door opened and the wrong child said, "Welcome home"? To understand what happened in that entrance hall, you have to go back 5 years and 8 months to a city that no longer exists in either of their memories the way it actually was. They had met in the autumn of 2017 at a compliance conference on the 22nd floor of the Conrad Uedo, in a windowless room that smelled faintly of new carpet and old coffee. She had been introduced as the lead forensic auditor on a bilateral anti-money laundering project between the Seoul Central Prosecutor's Office and a Singaporean bank, in which the Kang Group held, through 3 shell companies in Labuan, a position no one at the conference was supposed to be able to trace. He had been introduced as an observer. She had traced the position in the second panel session in front of 41 delegates, without naming him, and had done so with such quiet precision that he had understood, before she reached the end of her 3rd slide, that he was being told, in the only language she trusted, to leave the room. He had not left. He had stayed. At the coffee break, he had walked up to her and said in English, "You are the first person in this country who has ever made me want to be smaller than I am." She had looked at him for the length of one full breath, and then she had said in Korean, "Then be smaller." He had been smaller for the next 6 months. He had come to her one-room apartment in Mapo-gu, on the 4th floor of a building whose elevator did not work, and he had sat at her tiny kitchen table and eaten the food she cooked. Jollof rice she made with Korean short-grain rice because it was what she could find. Igusi she made with a paste of pumpkin seeds she ground herself. And, once, a doenjang jjigae that his mother would later say, tasting it in the Eunpyeong-gu kitchen with an expression he could not read, was made by a woman who had been taught by another woman who loved her. He had brought her, in the spring of 2018, to meet his Aomeoni for the first time. His mother had opened the gate herself. She had taken Adaisy's hands in both of her own. She had said, in Korean, in the voice she used only for people she had decided, before they arrived, to keep, "You have come. Sit down." They had married in the summer of 2019 in Yangpyeong, in a wooden chapel on a hillside above a river, in a ceremony attended by 28 people, including his mother, her mother, who had flown in from Enugu and had brought, in her hand luggage, a small bolt of aso-oke cloth in indigo and gold that his mother had received with both hands and a bow, and no one from his father's side of the family, because his father's side of the family had already begun the long, patient work of arranging his second marriage without telling him. They had lost a daughter in the winter of 2020. Her name had been Chiamaka Ha-eun-kong. She had lived for 11 days in the neonatal intensive care unit on the 14th floor of Severance Hospital under the care of a Dr. Yu, whose first name Min Jae could no longer remember, and she had died at 4:12 in the morning of a congenital heart defect the cardiologist had described, in a voice that did not know how not to be clinical, as incompatible with life. Ada Ez had held the child for the last 41 minutes. Min Jae had stood at the window and watched the Han River move under a gray sky and had not been able to make himself turn around. The stone in the cemetery in Yangpyeong bore her name in Hangul on the left and in the Roman alphabet on the right, and beneath both, the date, January 4th, 2020 to January 15th, 2020. Adaisy had chosen the epitaph. It read, in English, she was here. In Korean, Gunyo는 여기 있었다. The corrosion had begun in the spring after, not in anything either of them did. In the phone calls, his uncles began to make. In the men who began to appear in the lobby of the building in Mapo-gu. In the whispered conference at his father's grave on the second anniversary of his father's death, when his second uncle had said, quietly, to his cousins, and to no one who would tell Min Jae for another 8 months, that a queen of an empire had to be a woman the empire recognized, and a woman the empire could not photograph without turning to look twice, was a woman the empire would eventually turn against. In the sudden, unexplained cancellation of 2 long-standing shipping contracts. In the visit, in the autumn of 2021, from a man named Yoon Tae-hoon, his father's oldest sworn brother, whom he had called Hyung Nim since he was 19, who had sat in his office in Yeoksam-dong and had said, with the awful gentleness of a man delivering a diagnosis, Min Jae-ya, you are asking the family to carry a weight it did not agree to carry. The family will put the weight down. It is up to you where. Adaise had understood before he did. She had understood in the autumn. She had left in the spring. She had packed 1 suitcase, the navy dress, 3 books, a photograph of the child, the small bolt of aso-oke her mother had given his mother, the enamel bowl her grandmother had sent her from Enugu the year she turned 12, and she had gone to his mother's house in Eunpyeong-gu and had knelt on the wooden floor of the kitchen and had said, in Korean, Eomeoni, I am going. His mother had knelt too. His mother had held her face in both hands. His mother had said, you are not going. You are only being sent. There is a difference, and I will remember it. That was the first sentence his mother had ever spoken in her life that Adiez had written down. She had written it, that night, on the back of a receipt from a taxi from Eunpyeong-gu to the airport, in a hand steadier than it had any right to be. She had kept the receipt. What Adaeze Chiamaka Kang had been doing in the 3 years since, while Min Jae rebuilt his reputation, entered legitimate businesses, appeared on the cover of Forbes Korea in June of 2023, and became engaged in the summer of 2024 to the daughter of the Assemblyman Han, was the following. In April of 2022, 6 weeks after her return to Seoul from a 3-month interval in London, during which she saw no one, she took a contract position as a senior forensic auditor at a firm in Gwanghwamun called Cheong and Bayek, specializing in cross-border AML compliance for Korean corporates with Southeast Asian exposure. She was paid, on paper, 142 million won per annum. She lived in a 2-room apartment in Eunpyeong-gu, 440 meters from his mother's house, in a building without a doorman. She walked to his mother's house on Sundays. She had never once, in 3 years, asked his mother for money. In August of 2022, his mother suffered an ischemic stroke in the front courtyard of the Bukchon Hanok at 11:47 in the morning of a Tuesday. She was taken to Asan Medical Center. She spent 9 days in the stroke unit on the 6th floor and 4 months in the rehabilitation ward on the 9th. Not one of her husband's brothers came. Not one of her son's cousins came. His then-fiancé, Han Seo-yeon, sent a floral arrangement from a shop in Cheongdam and a card signed by a secretary. Adais came on the second day. Adais slept on a cot beside the bed for 8 of the 9 nights. Adais fed her the first spoonfuls of anchovy broth she was able to keep down. Adais read to her, in Korean, from a book of poems by Kim Hye-soon and from another by Han Kang until his mother slept. When his mother was discharged, Adais moved into the Pyeongchang-dong house. It had been meant to be 6 weeks. It had become 2 years and 4 months. During those 2 years, working from a small desk his mother had set up for her in the sunroom, Adais had also, quietly and on her own time, done the following. She had reconstructed from public filings, court records, and the internal accounting files she had lawfully retained from her final Kang Group audit in 2021. The full architecture of a scheme that had been running inside the Kang Group's legitimate shipping subsidiary since 2019. The scheme, briefly, was this. 3 sworn brothers of Min Jae's late father, including Yoon Tae-hoon, whom Min Jae still called Hyung-nim, had, over the objections of his mother, who had raised each of them in her own house when they were teenagers, been diverting approximately 4,300,000,000 won per year through a chain of shell companies in Labuan, Singapore, and Zurich. Routed through a Vladivostok-registered fishing concern, whose only real activity was the transportation of a category of goods for which no bill of lading was ever issued. The scheme had a name in their internal ledger. The name was Aomeonia Mog's, Mother's Share. It was the cruelest line of Korean Min Jae would ever read. 3 people had already died. The first was a junior compliance officer at the Singaporean bank named Wei Chen, aged 29, born in Penang, who had been found in his apartment on the 21st of March, 2023, with what the coroner had ruled a self-inflicted overdose of a benzodiazepine he had never been prescribed. The second was a Korean-Russian intermediary in Vladivostok named Kim Andre, aged 41, who had drowned on the 11th of September 2023 in a harbor he had grown up swimming in. The third was a woman named Nkechi Obi, aged 34, born in Aba, who had worked as a paralegal in a firm in Lagos that had once, briefly, held file custody on a Kang subsidiary trust. She had died on the 2nd of February 2024 of what the Lagos state coroner had called complications of asthma in a woman with no prior history of asthma. Adais had not known Nkechi personally. She had gone, alone, to the funeral in Aba, and she had knelt on the red earth and had promised, in Igbo, in a sentence she had not yet translated for anyone in this country, that the woman's daughter would be provided for. The end game, the true end game. The one that had brought Min Jae's mother out of her illness and into this letter-writing patience in the sunroom of the Pyeongchang-dong house, was not the money. The money was the bait. The end game was Min Jae's signature on the consolidation of the Kang Group's legitimate holdings, which he had provided that afternoon at 3:41 p.m. in the lawyer's office in Yeoksam-dong. With that signature, the sworn brothers had, under the shareholder covenants they had written for him, and he had not read past the 3rd page, a 90-day window in which they could trigger a forced buyout at a valuation set by an arbitrator they had already retained. In 90 days, they would own the empire, and they would not need him alive to run it. That was what she had come to tell him. That, and one thing more. He read the folder for 21 minutes without speaking. Adais had made it herself. She had bound it in a plain gray card cover of the kind used for university dissertations, and she had numbered the pages by hand, in the corner, in pencil, the way she numbered everything. There were 311 pages. He read the first 52 closely. He turned the rest. He set the folder down on the low walnut table between them. The table had been his father's. The scar on his left wrist, the one from Jagalchi in 2001, was resting on the edge of the wood the way it had rested on this same edge the night his father had first shown him the family's ledger, in this same room, in the year he turned 18. The little girl was upstairs. His mother had taken her to bed at 10:41. He had heard the two of them go up. He had heard his mother say, in Korean, softly, "Maya ya, brush your teeth." He had heard the child answer, in Korean, more softly, "Ne, halmeoni." He looked at Adayeze. He asked quietly, "Who is the child?" Adayeze said, "She is Maya Nkechi Kang. She is the daughter of the woman in Aba. The mother asked me, before she died, to take her. I took her." He asked, "Why did you come back?" She was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the gray folder. She looked at the wall above his shoulder. She said, in Korean, "I did not come back. I never left this house. Your mother is in this house." That was the third quotable line. He asked quietly, "You could have told me. Any time in 3 years. You did not tell me." She looked at him then. She looked at him for the length of one full breath, and then two. And then she said, in the same low, level Korean she had used at his mother's kitchen table on the night she had left, in a voice that was not soft and not hard, and was only terribly exact. "I did not come back for the man who signed those papers today. I came back for the boy who cried in the neonatal ward on the 14th floor of Severance on the morning of the 15th of January and could not turn around from the window. That boy is still my husband. The man who signed those papers is not. I am here for the boy. I will do what needs to be done for the boy. When it is done, I will go." That was the fourth quotable line. He did not answer. He set his hand, palm down, on the gray folder. He left it there. The meeting of the Kang Group's expanded board convened at 10:41 a.m. on the 21st of November in the 22nd floor conference room of the Yoksam Dong Tower. There were 7 men at the table and 1 woman. The woman was Adaiz. She sat on Min Jae's right. On her right sat a prosecutor from the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office, named Baek Sun-woo, whom she had known since the LSE, and who was, as the elder would later reveal, not only her former classmate, but the younger brother of a woman who had died in a courtroom in Enugu 18 years earlier under a verdict that had never been honest. He carried a slim leather folio. He did not open it yet. Min Jae did not raise his voice. He never did. He placed, one at a time, on the walnut of the table, a bound copy of the gray folder, a USB drive containing 41 gigabytes of wire records from the Vladivostok intermediary's laptop, lawfully surrendered under a mutual legal assistance treaty request filed in Seoul on the 14th of November. A notarized statement from a compliance officer at the Singaporean bank who had been reassigned to Zurich in April and had, upon a visit from Adayeze in September, chosen to speak. A coroner's addendum from Lagos State, dated the 9th of October 2024, in which the previous ruling on Nkechi Obi was formally reopened. And finally, a single sheet of paper on which was printed, in the plain typeface of the Seoul Central District Court, the reference number of a warrant that had been issued at 8:41 that morning. Court Order 2025-Hyung-Sang-1147. He spoke for 4 minutes. He named the routing of the money through Labuan and Singapore, and Zurich and Vladivostok, and he named the vessel and the false bills of lading, and he named the 3 deaths and the forensic doubt attaching to each, and he named, finally, the internal ledger entry, Iomeonie Moggs, mother's share. And he let the name of it sit in the air of the room for a length of time equal to 1 full breath. Then he looked, without turning his head, at the man sitting 3 chairs down on the left, and he said, "Tae Hoona." Yoon Tae-hoon, whom he had called Hyung-nim for 22 years, did not answer. The silence lasted 11 seconds. In it, one could hear the ventilation system and the distant sound of a printer on another floor, and the small, dry sound of the prosecutor Baek Sun-woo opening his folio. Yoon Tae-hoon did not answer. He did not look up. He did not object. He did not deny. He put both his hands flat on the walnut of the table, palms down in the posture of a man submitting to a weight he had known, in some hollow chamber below the level of language, was already on its way. That was the 5th quotable line. It was not a line. It was the silence of a man called by the name only the inner circle used, and giving no answer. It was the loudest sound in the room. The prosecutor, Baek Sun-woo, opened his folio. Over the following 7 weeks, the machinery turned off-stage. Warrants were served in Yeoksam-dong, in Cheongdam, in Pyeongchang-dong, in a fishing office in Vladivostok that had been shuttered for 11 days by the time the Russian Federal Police arrived. Indictments were filed against Yoon Tae-hoon and 8 others under articles of the Specific Economic Crimes Aggravated Punishment Act and the Act on the Regulation of Punishment of Criminal Proceeds Concealment. 3 accounts were frozen in Singapore, 2 in Labuan, 1 in Zurich. The court number 2025-Hyung-Sang-1147 was joined on the 6th of January 2026 by 3 more, 1149, 1151, 1163. The financial press wrote long, cautious articles about the restructuring of the Kong Group. Bloomberg Korea used the phrase quiet reckoning. Chosun Ilbo did not use the word dynasty. Min Jae did not attend the press conference. He went, on the morning it was scheduled, to the cemetery in Yangpyeong, to the small stone with 2 alphabets, and he sat on the cold ground beside it for 41 minutes. He did not cry. He had not cried in front of another person since the 15th of January, 2020, and he had not cried on the 15th of January, 2020 either. Grief had never been something he could give to a room. He set on the top of the stone a single Korean pear, unpeeled, and a small enamel bowl of the kind that had come from Enugu in 1993 in the hand luggage of a woman named Ijeoma Okonkwo, whom he had called Iomeonie Nim exactly twice in his life. He said his daughter's name aloud, once in Korean and once in Igbo, in the pronunciation Adaizi's mother had taught him one afternoon in a kitchen in London in the autumn of 2019. Then he went home, not to the Pyeongchang-dong house, to his mother's house in Eunpyeonggu. He had not slept in that house since he was 21. He slept in it now for 11 nights. He cooked. He was not good at it. He burnt the rice on the first night and undersalted the doenjang on the second. And on the third night, his mother came into the kitchen in her cotton nightdress and stood behind him at the stove. And she put her small, trembling hand on his shoulder. And she said, "Min Jae-ya, taste it before you serve it." He tasted it. He salted it. She sat at the table and let him serve her. She ate slowly. She said at the end, in the same flat, unemphatic Korean, "You have come home. Sit down." The second week he began, slowly, the courtship of forgiveness. not of his mother, who had never withheld it, but of the woman in the navy dress who was still living, with the child, Maya, in the Pyeongchang-dong house because his mother had asked her to stay through the new year. On the 5th of January, he sent to the gate of the Pyeongchang-dong house a small crate of pears from Naju, which he had driven 3 hours to buy in person from an orchard his father had once bought from in the 1980s. On the 12th, a jar of doenjang his mother had made in the autumn from beans grown by a neighbor in Eunpyeonggu. On the 19th, a book of poems by Kim Hye-soon in the Changbi edition. On the 26th, a book of poems by Han Kang in the same edition. He did not include notes. A daisy did not send thanks. On the 2nd of February, the second anniversary of the death of Nkechi Obi, he sent to the gate a small envelope in which was folded a bank draft in the name of Maya Nkechi Kang in the amount of 41 million won, drawn on his personal, not corporate, account, with a single line in his handwriting on the reverse, for her school fees, if her guardian will permit it. Adeyes cashed the draft on the 4th. She sent no note. That, in the calendar of small returns, was an answer. On the 9th of February, a Sunday, he came to the Pyeongchang-dong house for the first time since the night of the wedding. He came in a taxi, not the Maybach. He rang the bell at the gate. A daeze opened the gate. She was wearing an apron over the navy dress. She had been making anchovy broth. She stepped aside without speaking. He came in. He removed his shoes. He walked, in his socks, to the kitchen. He sat at the table. Maya came in a school uniform he had not known she owned, and she looked at him for the length of one full breath. And then she said, in Korean, "Ajeosi, would you like some pear?" He said, in Korean, more softly than he had spoken in 11 weeks, "Yes, please." At the end of the meal, when Maya had gone upstairs to do her homework and his mother had gone to her room to lie down, a daeze sat opposite him and put both her hands, palms flat, on the wood of the table in the posture of a woman about to name a weight. She said in Korean, "I will not be your wife again. I will not take your name. I will not sleep under this roof as a bride. I will stay in this house until your mother no longer needs me, and then I will move with Maya to a house of our own, 440 meters from your mother, in Eunpyeonggu. You may see Maya on Sundays if she agrees. You may sit at this table as her ajeosi. You may pay her school fees. You may not be called her father. That name belongs to a man in Aba who is buried in red earth. On the anniversary of our daughter's death, you may come to Yangpyeong at 4:12 in the morning, and I will already be there. We will not speak. We will stand. That is what I can give you. That is all." That was the 6th quotable line. He said, "Yes." She said nothing more. She rose and cleared the bowls. He thought, walking down through the garden to the gate afterward, that a man could spend an entire life mistaking a woman's terms for a woman's terms, and only late, only very late, understand that her terms had always been his salvation. The elder came on the first day of spring, not his mother. Ijoma Okonkwo, Adaeze's mother, 73 years old, born in Enugu in 1953, widowed since 2016, retired professor of comparative literature at the University of Nigeria at Nsukka, who had flown into Incheon on a Korean air flight from Lagos via Doha on a ticket Adaeze had not paid for. She arrived at the Pyeongchang-dong house on a Sunday afternoon in a hat of pale straw and a dress of indigo aso-oke of the same weave as the small bolt she had brought in 2019. His mother met her at the gate. The two women embraced without speaking, in the way of women who had lost the same child. She sat him down in the sunroom. Adais was not in the room. His mother was not in the room. Maya was in the garden with the persimmon tree. Ijoma poured tea. She poured his cup first, in the Korean manner, and her own second. Then she said, in the English she had learned at a mission school in the 1960s and had polished over 60 years. Min Jae, my son, there is a thing your wife has not told you, because she is a proud woman and a private woman, and she carries her dead the way we all carry ours. The prosecutor who sat on her right at your board meeting is a man named Baek Sun-woo. He is her friend from London, yes. He is also the younger brother of my elder sister's daughter, Chiamaka, the first Chiamaka, for whom your daughter was named, who died in a courtroom in Enugu in the year 2006 at the age of 19, under a verdict in a fraud case that was not honest, brought by men very much like the men who arranged in the year 2021 for your family to send my daughter away. My sister's daughter left behind a fund of 440,000 naira and a small piece of red earth in Aba. The fund was stolen by the same class of men in a different country wearing different suits. Nkechi Obi, who died last year of an asthma she did not have, was that girl's cousin. Do you understand what I am telling you? He understood. He set the tea down. She said, "We are asking you for one thing. Not for my daughter, not for me, for the fund." Baek Sun-woo has drawn the papers. It is a trust, registered in Seoul under Korean law, in the name of the two Chiamakas, the one in Enugu and the one in Yangpyeong. It will pay the school fees of Maya and Kechi Kong and of 11 other girls in Anambra State, of whom 4 are the granddaughters of my sister, and of whom 7 are the daughters of women I do not know, but whose names my sister kept in a book. It will pay them until they are 21. It requires a settler. The settler must sign on page 4. He must not read past page 3. Reading past page 3 is a form of counting the gift. We do not count the gift in our house. She placed the papers on the low table between them. There were 14 pages. He read the first page. He read the second. He read the third. On the 4th page, in the space marked settler, he signed his name in Hangul and, beneath it, in the Roman alphabet, the way his daughter's stone had been carved. He did not read pages 5 through 14. She took the papers. She folded them into her handbag. She said, in Igbo, softly, one sentence he did not understand, and then, in English, that was the 7th. He did not ask the 7th what. He knew. On the wall of the sunroom, above the low table, in a plain wooden frame of Manchurian oak, hung a photograph he had not noticed until that moment. It had been taken in the front courtyard of the Pyeongchang-dong house on a Sunday in the autumn of 2019, on a camera his mother owned but did not often use. In it stood his mother, in a gray linen jogori, holding the hand of Adeyezi, who was 3 months pregnant and did not yet know, and beside them, half turned toward the camera, stood a small woman in indigo aso-oke, Ijeoma, who had just arrived from Lagos 2 days before. Beneath the photograph, in his mother's hand, in Hangul on the left and in the Roman alphabet on the right, was written, Uri Daldul, our daughters, and beneath that, a single date, October 6th, 2019. A boy inherits his father's empire and calls it his own. A man inherits the women his father was too small to keep and calls them, at last, by the name they had been given at birth. Now, you, in the room where you are watching this, at whatever hour it has become while these words have been read to you, tell me, on the top step of that house in Pyeongchang-dong, on the 17th of November at 10:41 in the evening, When the door opened and the wrong child said, "Welcome home," in two languages, and the woman in the navy dress said, "Sit down," what would you have done? Would you have sat? Would you have turned and walked back down the 3 stone steps into the rain? Would you have signed on page 4 without reading past page 3? Tell me in the comments. Tell me the specific thing, not the feeling, the specific thing. And then, if this story has done to you what a story is supposed to do, if you are a little quieter inside your own chest than you were 41 minutes ago, subscribe to Korean Mafia Family and tap the bell so the next chapter finds you the moment it is set down. There is a woman in the next chapter who returns to a house in Seongbuk-dong after 17 years in Osaka to bury her father and finds at the gate a boy who calls her Ayama in a language she did not teach him. You are going to want to be in the room for that one too. Stay with us. The door is open. Come in. Sit down.